It's the violence of silence. I'm Jessica Denson, and this is Lights On. I want to thank you all for joining me after our historic demonstration last weekend in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., 14th now. We made an indelible mark in history. We laid down the line for who was on the right side and who was not. And Congress, yes, absolutely and abysmally failed on Monday, on January 6th, instead of really standing up for the rule of law, for the peaceful transfer of power, for our Constitution. They allowed the whole country to be gaslit, to be afraid of the optics of using that day for its genuine purpose of preserving our democracy and our rule of law, and instead confirmed the certification of Donald J. Trump, a barred candidate, barred president under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment without objection from a single Democratic lawmaker. This will be their legacy. I want to play a brief clip from my speech on Saturday at the Lincoln Memorial and just kind of take it on the other side. This was the line. We drew the line for them, and I want to thank everyone so much who joined us in this movement to do that.
Never get this moment back. Our lawmakers will decide not just the future of this country, but the future of the free world. They have the tools, the legal mechanism, not only the ability, but the obligation to stop an illegal presidency from destroying centuries of sacrifices for freedom. The only question is, do they have the courage? If we pass this unthinkable threshold into fascism, generations will look back to this very moment to see if they did.
It was truly a spiritual experience this past weekend in DC, and I want to emphasize, despite not having massive crowds, how much support there was for us from around the country, frankly, around the world. The people that did join us in person came from California, Oregon, Illinois, Florida, Canada, Maine, Massachusetts, all corners of this country to come and support us. We raised tens of thousands of dollars. I was really transparent on this on our last day of the rally, which I highly encourage. Please subscribe to the Jessica Denson YouTube channel and check out the 14th Now playlist. We have all of the rallies of our speakers. And on the last day of the rally, I was really transparent because I wanted people to understand just how much support was behind this. We raised over $80,000 in under a week to support the production and the putting on of this 3-day demonstration. So to anybody who questions the support around the country behind this movement, that is a very clear indication. It was absolutely, absolutely bitter cold. If you were with us there in Washington, you know how absolutely frigid it was, and we were braving the temperatures there, and it was just a beautiful display. On Friday, we had a rally with Clifton Cash, who was wonderful political comedian who's been spreading the word relentlessly on social media. We had Mark Graber, constitutional scholar, Andrea Chalupa, authoritarian expert, documentarian, filmmaker, expert on Ukraine and Russia. They gave moving speeches, and then we all went to the halls of Congress where we made our presence known. We made our presence known. These congressmen and women can never credibly claim that they did not know we were there, that they did not know the right thing to do, that they did not have a correction of the gaslit optics that they decided to latch onto in claiming that not objecting to a man who rejected the peaceful transfer of power is somehow a violation of the peaceful transfer of power. It was like a continuing coup this past Monday on January 6th when they certified that election without objection. It was like a complicity and validation in all of Donald Trump's deadly actions 4 years ago. You can't look at it any other way. But going back to our beautiful movement on 14 Now, we continued on Saturday with Craig Sicknick, the brother of Brian Sicknick, We had Caitlin Bird, an extremely talented columnist from Brooklyn, who wrote that article, King Trump is Not Inevitable, trying to urge these lawmakers, especially the Democrats when they still had power in the Senate, to raise an amnesty bill. We had my friend and ally in this fight, just met him over the past 2 weeks, and we have been nearly inseparable. We were in DC getting the last elements of this lockdown and all through it. Josh Johnson, evangelical pastor of Envision Church in West Hollywood, California. It was a beautiful, beautiful movement. Everybody that came out expressed so clearly why they understand what's on the line right now, why it was so incumbent upon our lawmakers to act. And that work is absolutely not in vain. We're going to talk today a lot about history. I'm going to talk about Hitler. I'm going to talk about things that we should be talking about and acknowledging in this moment as we foolishly try to pretend like we can move forward with a functioning constitution when we're allowing a man to go into that office whose very presidency is illegal from its inception. He will be a president whose physical occupation of that office is without legal authority, who has no constitutional authority to exercise any presidential powers due to his unremoved 14th Amendment disability. So to think that we're going to somehow be able to work within the constraints of the Constitution when we have blatantly disregarded them from jump is a very, very foolish calculation. So I'm going to share some of that historical perspective today. I also want to let you know, before I talk anymore, that we have John Bonifaz on deck. John Bonifaz is, of course, the president of Free Speech for People, constitutional scholar, wonderful advocate for enforcement of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and his opinion as to whether Donald Trump is an illegal president has not changed. And I'm so grateful to have him here today to help me debrief kind of this week we've been through. It's kind of, it's been a week of actual fires, raging fires in California, which our hearts break for the people and the animals. Me in particular, I'm always thinking about the animals that have to be left behind. These areas in California I know so well. I have hiked in these mountains. They are absolutely beautiful places. There are so many people spread out across Southern California right now that are suffering so much. And it just, I got to tell you, it feels like a week of biblical proportions with what is happening in the failures of our country, in the government, in Congress, in Washington, D.C., these fires raging. We really, really, really need to take stock of where we are and be willing to do the hard work, the very difficult work, the uncomfortable work that is going to give us any hope of survival, any hope whatsoever. Credit, by the way, to Ethan Swope, the AP reporter who has taken some of these amazing images. And I actually just retweeted on my Blue Sky account. If you're not already following me, I'm Jessica Denson 07 on Blue Sky, and I reposted a starter pack of photojournalists who are doing amazing, amazing work right now. So I would highly suggest following them. And also, if you go down my thread, if you happen to be in California, if you happen to not already know of your resources, and I'm sure you do, I've reposted a lot of resources for people and animals who might need that help. And if you have the resources, please consider helping some of those organizations and people who are helping the people in greatest need right now. But again, one more thing today before we bring in John and before I give you this little opener from historian Timothy Ryback, who wrote about Hitler in depth, and again this week in a book, and again this week in The Atlantic. I want to share with you the letter that I wrote to our supporters after the 14th Now movement concluded. I don't want to say the 14th Now movement concluded. After our 3-day event concluded on Sunday, I just want to share what I wrote and what we wrote. This was from our group. This movement is indelible. We did our duty, although our elected officials failed to do theirs. We bore witness to the Constitution, and history will bear witness to us. We are citizens, not seasoned organizers, who felt that inaction was not an option. We organized a 3-day demonstration in record time and gathered peacefully in the nation's capital to resist the certification of the election as a moral necessity. Just want to put some images up as I'm speaking to just show you the beautiful presence that we had there over the weekend. We came from so many corners of this republic to stand and march in the frigid cold for long hours. We lobbied in the halls of Congress, and these lawmakers can never credibly claim that they did not hear us. Countless supporters who could not be with us in person joined our calls to action and generously donated their time and money. Because of this sacrifice, history will bear witness to our defense of democracy as it has to the seeds of powerful movements in our nation's past. Our solidarity and testimony is a powerful indictment. It was an enormous honor to have locked arms with you. And it genuinely was an enormous honor from everyone who was joining us, both in person and in spirit. I can't say it enough. I can't thank you enough. Before I get to Timothy Ryback, I just want to address one other obscenity that occurred today, and that, of course, is the sentencing or lack thereof of Donald J. Trump in New York after he was convicted on 34 felony counts for having cheated his way into the presidency the first time by hiding something from the voters that was against the law. He was given unconditional discharge. That was the way that our judicial system, in an unprecedented manner, rectified somehow upholding the jury's verdict and yet having no consequences whatsoever. A complete collapse. Is it good that he remains a convicted felon? Absolutely. Is it okay in any way, shape, or form that he walks away scot-free without punishment? Absolutely not. And there are so many people who bear responsibility for this failure, for this abject failure, from Merrick Garland failing to act from day one, from Biden appointing someone like Merrick Garland and not someone who had the real teeth to take somebody on like this. I want to just read from The Guardian. David Smith, he wrote in a piece today, Trump's scot-free sentencing is proof of special treatment throughout trials. And he wrote, imagine if the roles had been reversed. Trump would have appointed a firebrand special counsel to aggressively pursue the cases from day one. Not for the first time, Democrats played by a quaint set of rules, even as Republicans were tearing up the rule book. Sound familiar? Sound familiar? I'm going to read the introduction to a piece right before we bring John in, to a piece in The Atlantic called The Forgotten History of Hitler's Establishment Enablers. Now, this is a review of Timothy Ryback's book that was actually published in March in The Atlantic. And it's a review of his book, which is called, as I get back to my notes, Takeover, Hitler's Final Rise to Power. Now, this week, Timothy Ryback wrote another piece called How Hitler Dismantled a Democracy in 53 Days. And after I talk to John, I'm going to read some from that. But let me just read this one paragraph from this piece back in March in The Atlantic, reviewing Timothy Ryback's book. It really sums up so much of where we are. It says, Ryback details week by week, day by day, and sometimes hour by hour how a country with a functional, if flawed, democratic machinery handed absolute power over to someone who could never claim a majority in an actual election, and whom the entire conservative political class regarded as a chaotic clown with a violent following. Ryback shows how major players thought they could find some ulterior advantage in managing him. Each was sure that, after the passing of a brief storm cloud so obviously overloaded that it had to expend itself, they would emerge in possession of power. The corporate bosses thought that if you looked past the strutting and the performative anti-Semitism, you had someone who would protect your money. Communist ideologues thought that if you peered deeply enough into the strutting and the performative anti-Semitism, you could spy the pattern of a popular revolution. The decent right thought that he was too obviously deranged to remain in power long, and the decent left, tempered by early fights against different enemies, thought that if they forcibly stuck to the rule of law, then the law would somehow by itself entrap a lawless leader. In a now familiar paradox, the rational forces stuck to magical thinking. That's for you, Michael Popak. Magical thinking, while the irrational ones were more logical, parsing the brute equations of power. And so the storm never passed. In a way, it still has not. It most certainly still has not. We have our work cut out for us, and we have the lines drawn right now as to who is doing the work and who is frankly aiding and abetting and complicit in the cover-up of these crimes. Because if you don't use the tools that you have right now to stop this and to mitigate this and to not cover your own backs because you're afraid. I want to just share one more comment before I bring in John Bonifaz, and I'm going to share several more from you before the end of the show. But this is from Caitlin Bird, that one of the wonderful speakers I mentioned earlier. And this was one of her reactions to the lack of action on January 6th. She said, cowardice. Our elected leaders are steeped in cowardice. Instead of stepping up and thinking about whatever tools they have at hand to at least slow down, delegitimize, undermine, or even stop Trump's worst plans, they're choosing to shove their vulnerable constituents in front to save themselves. And that's most certainly what happened this week. We've talked about that before, what a selfish calculation that is. Notwithstanding, we understand that there are threats out there, that these people have concerns, but our whole country has concerns right now on a massive global scale. The world has concerns. And for them to abdicate their role as public leaders and their duty, their obligation to the Constitution for cowardly concerns about their own public safety, which frankly would be so well taken care of if there was just a collective action of courage. That is disgusting. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming my esteemed guest today, President and constitutional scholar, President at Free Speech for People, John Bonifaz. John, welcome back to Lights On.
Thank you, Jessica. Thanks for having me back. Great to be with you.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Before I talk anymore, just give me your thoughts on this week.
Well, I couldn't agree more. This was an abdication of the duty of members of Congress to abide by the oath that they took on January 3rd to protect and defend the Constitution. We either have a Constitution or we do not. And Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is a critical provision of the Constitution. It is that very provision that's designed to protect the Republic when an insurrectionist who has taken the oath of office seeks to try to hold office again. That's why the framers of the 14th Amendment put it in the Constitution after the Civil War, and that's why we have it today. And yet, as we know, on January 6, 2025, Congress did not even raise this objection, despite the overwhelming evidence that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection and that he is disqualified from holding any future public office.
I have seen a lot of cover put out over the past few days. And as you know, John, I had no patience for the cover being put out before January 6th to try to give these Democratic lawmakers in particular, because they're the ones who have been so vocal about the threat that they know Donald Trump poses. I had no patience for that cover prior to January 6th. And after it, I've seen some more comments along that line, perhaps suggesting that, even though they didn't object on January 6th, that doesn't mean that they're all kosher with Donald Trump's, qualification for office, or somehow their failure to object, there's some remaining possibility for them to express their objection to his disqualification under Section 3. Is there any logic or rationale behind that?
I don't see any logic to that. I mean, the real challenge right now is, was this just a political talking point leading up to the election? Was the claim that he was a fascist, that he was a threat to our democracy, threat to our republic, that he was disqualified, was that all just political talk? And then after the election, they no longer want to say that. I mean, on our end at Free Speech for People, we're very clear, and I know you are too, Jessica, and everyone else involved in the 14th Now movement, that Section 3 of the Constitution Section 3 of the 14th Amendment remains in the Constitution, and that Donald Trump remains disqualified. Nothing changed because of the election from those set of facts that demonstrate that he is disqualified. Nothing changed with respect to the Colorado Supreme Court ruling, the Maine Secretary of State's ruling, the Illinois court's ruling, all of which found that he is disqualified, with the Supreme Court in Trump v. Anderson not touching that question. They only ruled, as we know, that states cannot have the power to enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, but they left untouched the underlying merits of those rulings that Donald Trump's disqualified. So he is an adjudicated insurrectionist, and he remains disqualified. And yet somehow, so many voices that were telling us that he's a threat to our democracy, that he is disqualified, that he's a fascist, they became quiet after the election. And that is a huge challenge on the part of those of us who want to continue to defend our democracy. We've got to keep standing up, and we've got to keep resisting nonviolently to this disqualified person occupying the presidency or about to do so.
So on January 20th, as it stands right now, Donald Trump is set to assume the presidency. Chief Justice John Roberts is set to swear him in. I know, excuse me, I've got a kitten in the background wreaking havoc. So if you hear any noises, that's what it is. We have him set to be sworn in, and there's so much conversation out there. I got to tell you, John, there's a lot of good intentioned people out there who are thinking, is there any mechanism whatsoever that we have to stop this constitutional crisis in action, or constitutional crisis in progress? Is it a crime, do you believe, for Donald Trump to be sworn in? Is a violation of federal law that prohibits aiding and abetting an insurrection? Is there anything that could be done, do you believe, from a legal standpoint to thwart or prevent the action of his swearing in between now and January 20th based on the 14th Amendment?
I don't see an avenue after the certification by the U.S. Congress of the Electoral College votes and the failure to raise an objection under Section 3. I don't see an avenue to then coming into court or doing some other action to try to argue that he is unable to take that oath on January 20th. That being said, he will be an illegitimate president the moment he takes that oath, and every action he takes will be illegitimate and subject to a federal court challenge under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So I don't think the story around Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is by far over in any way whatsoever. And you are right to highlight that history will record this as a critical, pivotal moment. But I do think that we have to keep raising this question of his legitimacy and making clear that he remains disqualified and therefore will be an illegitimate president.
Now, I know you and I, and actually I've spoken to this with other legal scholars, including my friend Lawrence Tribe. His thought on this from months back, from the earliest conversations I had with this, and it sounds like what you're suggesting as well, is that there can be instant legal action to challenge Donald Trump's actions as a president based on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Now, I feel like this is too little too late, which is why I literally, became a virgin political organizer and put on this demonstration in 2 weeks with an amazing team. But that is an avenue that can be pursued from day one when and should he, frankly, do anything as president. I mean, his basic fundamental pretext for holding that office is not founded in law.
Correct.
So it can be challenged out the gate, right?
Correct. You have to have parties that are directly impacted by those particular actions in order to have standing. But obviously he will be doing, he'll be doing many things starting January 20th, day one, that will be challengeable on the part of people being impacted. And, we'll have to see what kind of actions might get challenged, but I do think that we have to continue to invoke Section 3 of the 14th Amendment even after he is sworn in.
All right, John. So now I want to address something with you that is out there, and I don't want to ignore this because I don't know if you're hearing these conversations, but I hear them constantly. And there's a lot of people out there that feel like there's some 11th hour plan, some covert plan by the Democrats or by NATO and our foreign allies or President Biden, some executive order that he signed back in September that's going to somehow come in and swoop and save us all before January 20th. Listen, I think that knowing that would be one heck of an acting job by a whole lot of people in the Democratic Party to be quiet in preparation for something like this. I don't think it's happening. Can I just get your level-headed thoughts on any of these theories?
Yeah, I don't think it's happening either. I mean, look, we have a process here by which somebody becomes president of the United States. Number one, they have to be qualified for becoming president. They can't be under 35 years of age by the time of the inauguration. They can't be a naturalized citizen or not a citizen at all of the United States. They have to be a natural born citizen, and they have to not have engaged in insurrection after taking the oath of office. So that's the first test. Once they are qualified, they can appear on ballots all across the country to run for that office. And that's where the first mistake took place, was to allow Donald Trump to be on those state ballots, and ultimately for the Supreme Court to say states couldn't enforce that qualification, despite the fact that states have enforced other qualifications like the citizenship and the age qualifications before, where people were trying to run who didn't meet those qualifications. So then you have to have a free and fair election that's verified, where there's an actual understanding that the votes were properly counted. Now we have an election that was declared by the computer generated tallies on election night, but we never did engage in election verification. And as you know, Susan Greenhall on our team, our senior advisor on election security, and a number of computer scientists wrote to Vice President Harris a week after the election, urging that she engage in recounts for those election verification purposes. So that didn't happen. And then the next place where we go is with respect to January 6th. And at that time, Congress has a duty to make sure that the votes were regularly given, which also includes whether the people who were, whether the candidate who's being selected was in fact qualified. And at that moment, Congress had a duty to identify that Donald Trump was disqualified and to not count those electoral college ballots. That didn't happen. So there is nothing else within the process here of becoming president of the United States that takes place between now and inauguration day. There's nothing else laid out in the Constitution. So that's why I want to be clear. I don't think there's any, new sleeper process is about to happen here. I've just walked through how this process takes place. It's all been laid out very clearly, in the Constitution, federal code, state laws, and we are where we are, which is Congress didn't do its duty, and all these other things happen with respect to not upholding Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, not engaging in election verification, and so now we face a situation where this lawless ex-president is about to become president again, despite his disqualification for holding that office.
It's truly unthinkable to think that we're going to enter this phase that could, from the historical warnings that we have, completely dismantle centuries of work for freedom. And we don't even know for sure that Donald Trump won. And I don't feel like that's a conspiratorial perspective to take. I did this show a couple days ago. I know I shared it with you and the team at Free Speech for People with Nathan Dyer, who was on our team at 14th Now. He was pleading with me, absolutely pleading with me to put his case out to the public before January 6th. And I didn't want to do it, John. I didn't want to do it because I wanted to be laser focused on our point, which was regardless of whether Donald Trump won or not, he's not qualified to take this office. But I understood Nathan's motive because to be at this point where we haven't conducted the election hygiene that all healthy democracies conduct to make sure that that their elections are secure and verified. And with all of the red flags from your organization, from election security experts, combined with all of the anomalies, the bomb threats, et cetera, that the fact that we don't even have confidence, and there frankly is not confidence among the electorate and among the American people, is, to me, just so unforgivable. Where is the FBI? Where is the Department of Justice on the efforts to make sure that the public has confidence in this election?
Well, they're nowhere. I mean, look, they had evidence leading up to this election that Donald Trump's operatives in multiple states had gone into election offices and copied illegally voting system software. They effectively, as the Georgia Attorney General put it before they got that software, they had the keys to the kingdom of voting system software. And that's why the Georgia Attorney General refused to turn it over directly. So they went behind the AG's back and they went to Coffee County, Georgia. They found a like-minded election official who would open that door up and let them walk in and illegally copy that voting system software. They did this in Michigan. They did this in Pennsylvania. They did this in multiple states. And therefore, they had the ability with that voting system software, as computer scientists told the FBI and the DOJ repeatedly in letters that we sent them, they had the ability to effectively engage in disruption of the election with respect to the vote counting process. They had that ability with that access to the entire voting system software in multiple states. And yet there was no action taken by the DOJ or the FBI with respect to that overwhelming evidence. There was action taken by a Colorado prosecutor who found that Tina Peters ultimately, through a trial, was convicted and sentenced to 9 years in jail for her role in allowing the copying of that voting system software. There is a trial in Michigan by, again, another local prosecutor of Stephanie Lambert and her role engaged in the same kind of activity there in Michigan of copying voter system software, another Trump operative. And Fani Willis, before she became removed from the case in Fulton County, Georgia, she indicted, among others, Sidney Powell and other Trump operatives who were part of the Coffee County breach. So there were local efforts at the local prosecutorial level to hold these operatives accountable. There was no concerted effort by the Department of Justice or the FBI to deal with the multi-state plot that took place. Sorry, I've lost, I'm not hearing you.
Thank you for reminding me. I've had myself on mute to mitigate the kitten sounds. But yeah, absolutely, John. The question that all of us are, I know that Nathan, my guest from Sunday, is literally trying to launch his own multi-state legal action that I wish him all the best with. I'm concerned that he's out of time, which is kind of why I didn't, as you described, pursue these conversations starting a month or so back, because I understood the deadlines expired. But more power to him. I just feel like this is not what citizens should have to do on their own. This is the role of the government to do it. And the fact that it's been put into the hands of citizens is it's a collapse. It's, to me, it all goes into the same jar of obeying in advance. There's so many people, we can talk about the sentencing. We can talk about, Jack Smith wrapping up his investigation and closing his prosecutions before Trump took office. So many things where we're just like, we're going to make it easy and convenient for you to steamroll democracy when we could have been fighting with all we have through legal processes.
Yeah, no, it's incredible, right? I mean, just to underscore the election verification point. We all understand that banks go through audit processes, that financial institutions writ large engage in checking and cross-checking with respect to their finances. And, the difference here is that when we vote, we have a secret vote, right? So we don't get some kind of receipt or documentation proving that this is how we voted and our vote was properly counted. So the only way that we know with respect to elections that there is a careful vote counting process and that it's meaningful and that it's accurate is to double check. Don't just rely on the computers that we know in every instance, from the banking industry, from the uh, tech industry. In every instance, we know computers are hackable. So don't just trust the computers when they count our votes. Do that double checking. Engage in the rigorous audit process, and in this case, engage in the recounts. That's not a big ask. That's an obvious point. We're not alleging at Free Speech or People that there was election fraud. We have no idea whether there was or not. That's not the point. The point is that election verification needed to happen, and it did not. Now, with respect to Jack Smith, you're absolutely right. There was no reason for him to have closed up shop. Let him continue through January 20th, and let the record show that Donald Trump sought to shut it down and to fire him. That's what really should have happened here, rather than him just closing up shop prematurely, so Donald Trump doesn't have the political headache of having to fire him. We know he would have fired him. We know that, but that would have been a far better way to close out those cases, to demonstrate that this tyrant wannabe can't handle accountability for his own crimes. So I do agree, that was a mistake. And certainly I agree from the get-go that Merrick Garland was not the right person for that position of Attorney General. And we, in fact, at Free Speech or People, called for his resignation years ago because it was clear he was not doing his job in holding Donald Trump accountable for his crimes. The New York Times, this is not, well discussed, but the New York Times some time ago now did a major story about where Garland, went with his investigation. And one of the things they uncovered was that he and his people in the Department of Justice decided early on, once they came into the department, that it was unnecessary to focus on Donald Trump and the crimes he committed because his political future was over in their view. And therefore, there would be no need to start there. They were going to start at the low level of the insurrectionists on January 6th and so-called build their way up. But there was no need to worry about going after Trump and his crimes because, again, they thought his political future was over. That was not a legal decision. That was a political decision on their part, based, frankly, on a ridiculous premise that he was not going to run again and that his political future was over. And they've proven to have been wrong. And we now know the results of that decision, having waited 2+ years to assign this matter to Jack Smith, when it's clear, had they started from the moment that they came into power, in 2021, with all the evidence that was already there, to go ahead and indict Donald Trump for the crimes he had committed, not to mention all that was already documented in the Robert Mueller report. Right. Jessica, we heard for years during the Trump administration from those who claimed to be calling for accountability for Donald Trump that we just had to rely on Robert Mueller, that leave it to Robert Mueller and he will handle all this. He'll investigate this, he'll get to the bottom of it, and he'll do the right thing. Well, what happened? In the end, he wrote a very lengthy report identifying 10 separate incidents of obstruction of justice on the part of Donald Trump, violations of federal law, and identifying that there was Russian interference in the elections, and making clear that there was evidence of coordination, but not coming out saying it directly with respect to any crimes that have been committed. But the bottom line here is that report was then shelved on the view that, well, he's the president and we can't engage based on Department of Justice policy, which is wrong, to prosecute a sitting president, that we just can't do that. Now, Mueller was brought before Congress and he was asked, well, are you saying after he's out of office that he could be prosecuted for crimes he's committed? And Robert Mueller said yes. So we now know that there was a documented trail here of evidence of crimes that Donald Trump committed And when Merrick Garland got there, he did nothing with that evidence. Years of investigation by Robert Mueller, and Merrick Garland does nothing with that. His own U.S. attorney was prosecuting the hush money case, and Michael Cohen, Trump's former private attorney, went to federal prison for his role in that. And that too was all there for the Justice Department to pursue, and they didn't. So we're left to a Manhattan district attorney pursuing that, and we're left then with today's sentencing, which is a frankly joke that somehow Donald Trump has zero consequences for the 34 felony counts for which he was convicted. This is a colossal collapse of the rule of law. This is a collapse of the rule of law on so many levels. And we now have this lawless ex-president becoming president again. But look, my message to your viewers, to all of us, is that this does not mean that we give up. It simply means that we continue to speak the truth. We continue to speak out. We continue to march together and make clear that this president is illegitimate, that he needs to be resisted nonviolently every step of the way with respect to his illegitimate actions, and that we shall never forget of the crimes he's committed and of the disqualification that he faces with respect to occupying the presidency.
Absolutely, John. If you can indulge me in for a moment more in my kind of indictment of both our Democratic leaders, who we expected to be on our side in this, and the media writ large. I'm going to share a couple of things. You know, we had this split screen this week with the memorials for President Jimmy Carter. His character in contrast to the character of somebody like Donald Trump. And yesterday, when he was being eulogized, President Biden said, we have an obligation to give hate no safe harbor and to stand up to the greatest sin of all, the abuse of power. Now, I got to tell you that was a little bit hard for me to hear, knowing how much the Democrats, up and including President Biden, have failed to stand up to the greatest sin of all, the abuse of power from Donald Trump and his allies. Another guest of this program who I adore, but I really want to call these people out because I think they're just going to try to ride on this train of like social media, cable news hot takes, or like, floor debate hot takes where they're calling out MAGA. And I just want to clear up that that's not going to clear your name here. You have a responsibility to act. My guest of this program, like I said, someone I adore, Jasmine Crockett, just said I think on the floor of the House a few days ago, my Republican colleagues, I don't want to hear that they care about crime, because if they did, they would take care of their own house. They can't even keep their own house crime free. Well, Democrats just had an opportunity to keep our whole country crime free, and they failed. Any media network out there that's got hot takes 24/7 of look at MAGA this, look at them making a fool of themselves, look at them shaming themselves. That's all frankly, not only is it a disservice, but I think it's actively working against what we need right now to actually save us. Because if you're not giving people, if you're providing this cover and acting like just calling out the nonsense of the other side when your side isn't even taking action, is a very dangerous place to be. I'm just going to quote one more thing before I let you chime in, but this is from the Timothy Reinbach piece that I was quoting from, not the one I was quoting from earlier, but his new piece this week in The Atlantic, published on January 8th. He says, just got a million screens in front of me, so let me pull it up here. Just give me 1 second. He says, in researching and writing this piece, I intentionally ignored these ultimate outcomes, and he's talking about the ultimate outcomes of Hitler and World War II, and instead traced events as they unfolded in real time with their attendant uncertainties and misguided assessments. A case in point, the January 31, 1933 New York Times story on Hitler's appointment as chancellor was headlined, "Hitler puts aside aims to be dictator." To me, that John just is in line with anybody acting like we can move forward and mitigate the ambitions of a lawless president. I understand you're saying to keep fighting. I'm going to be in that fight with everybody 100%, but I still can't get back to forgiving this moment of abdication.
Yes. Look, we have to hold those in power accountable. And that includes those in power who claim to be on our side, defending our democracy. We have to demand that they uphold their own oaths of office to defend the Constitution. Now, I think, Jessica, we can say very clearly what's going on with respect to the so-called opposition party. Their focus is the 2026 election and the 2028 election. That's how they're putting their emphasis now on. They think, well, it didn't work out the way they wanted, but they're going to focus on the next election cycle. And we're a nonpartisan organization, Free Speech People. We're not engaged in that kind of political decision making. But the fact is that the Constitution lays out a lot of other things other than election processes, right? I mean, yes, it's true that the House of Representatives every 2 years there must be elections for every member of the House. And yes, there are Senate terms of 6 years, and there are Senate elections that happen every 2 years for a certain segment of the Senate. And yes, every 4 years is a presidential election. That's laid out in the Constitution. But there's other things that are laid out in the Constitution as well, including Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And that's what's so incredible here, is that you have members of this so-called opposition party, and all they're going to rely on as a check to this lawless ex-president about to become president again, this disqualified person, all they're going to rely on is the next election cycle. And so their entire focus becomes around what is the political set of talking points that's going to work. What actions can we take to persuade whatever segment of the electorate they think needs to be persuaded, that enables them to take back the House, take back the Senate, take back the presidency. And that kind of thinking, really undermines the defense of our democracy when all you're doing is focusing on the next election cycle rather than focusing on the here and now. The here and now is that the Constitution lays out clearly who's qualified, who's not. They were silent on that question on January 6th. And I think they need to step up and become loud again on it. They were very clear about it with the House Select Committee's report. They were very clear about it.
John, how can they do that? I mean, they have no credibility if they come forward and are loud on it in the future when they completely abandon their opportunity to act on it when they could.
Well, I agree. I agree. On the other hand, at our urging, I'd like to see one or more of them say, we made a huge mistake not to speak out on January 6th, and we are going to start speaking out on it. I'd like to at least see that. I'm not giving up on the idea that we keep pushing them to do the right thing. And that's everyone, every member of Congress. Yeah. Because what's going to happen, we know, Jessica, from day one of this next Trump presidency, there will be abuses of power. To your point in quoting President Biden at President Carter's funeral, there will be new abuses of power, and there will be new arguments that need to be made around challenging those abuses of power. And the question is everybody just going to roll over now and claim, well, he won again, assuming he did, and he's now president again, and we just have to work to find common ground after calling him a fascist? I mean, where is
I'm going to read from this Ryback piece when I let you go. And I hope you'll listen. Even I won't read it now because I want to ask you a couple more questions just because it's in the comments and it's my sentiment. Yeah. Like, I feel like, John, you're talking about these Democratic lawmakers working towards the next election. I think it's incredibly naive to think that we're going to have any semblance of a normal election in the future.
I agree. I think there's going to be a huge danger here that this lawless ex-president coming into power is going to try to disrupt any future election. I agree.
John, I think people are looking to you and me, and I'm going to be really transparent with my audience. Like, I first of all, thank you for your patience and waiting till my Friday show. I'm not the kind of person who does like a video every 15 minutes. So if you don't see me posting on YouTube all the time, definitely check out my Blue Sky account. I was been very active on there all week and reacting to the events of the week. But, people have been looking to me, John, and I'm sure they're looking to you and organizations like you for what do we do now? What do we do now? And you kind of mentioned it a little. Stay in the fight, hold leaders accountable. Do you think the one thing that's been suggested to me is starting a new party? And this is, a conundrum that our country has been dealing with for years, of this two-party system that seems to fail so many of us so often. But, one thing that I thought is, you think about how MAGA hijacked the Republican Party and made it so that they could not act without their support and endorsement. And I almost feel, and I know you're nonpartisan, but I almost feel like the Democratic Party needs a hijacking. And I say that in the, forgive my use of that word. It's purely figurative, but it needs a hijacking from the people to demand that they actually work for us now, and can't get away with this posturing for democracy when they're not actually doing the work of democracy.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, we're nonpartisan, so we don't wade into political party strategy or electoral strategy. But what I will say is that there are a host of democracy reforms that need to be enacted, that we need to be fighting for, to really preserve and protect our democracy, from ending big money dominance of our politics, to protecting the right to vote in our elections, to taking on big tech social media companies when they amplify threats of violence and disinformation on their platforms. Those are a lot of the issues that we work on and will continue to work on at Free Speech for People. But we're also not going to stop in calling out the abuses of power of this next Trump administration. And we're not going to stop in demanding that the Constitution be respected when it comes to a lawless ex-president becoming president again.
Well, thank you so much, John. Thank you, first of all, for being so supportive of this movement, the 14th Now movement, as in the lead up. Thank you for joining me today in this first follow-up to January 6th and this week. And thank you so much for the work that you do, your work, Susan's work, everybody at Free Speech for People. It's invaluable, and I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for your leadership and your courage. It's great to be with you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So, as promised, I want to read from this piece in The Atlantic this week. Timothy Ryback, I'm going to try to get him on the show. By the way, shout out to David Schultz, who wrote the Hill piece just a couple weeks ago saying how Congress could act. It's been David Schultz who has been sharing with me these pieces in The Atlantic and pointing me to this historical perspective. But I want to just read. From this piece, How Hitler Dismantled a Democracy in 53 Days. And it's talking about how when Hitler came to power, by the way, through an election, he got to that enabling act, which basically made him a dictator in a country that was formerly a democracy. I'm going to read from it. Quote, in this historic hour, now this is a quote within the article, quoting the German Social Democrats who were in opposition to Hitler. In this historic hour, we German Social Democrats solemnly pledge ourselves to the principles of humanity and justice, of freedom and socialism, Wells said. Wells was a leader of that party. He chided Hitler for seeking to undermine the Weimar Republic and for the hatred and divisiveness he had showed. Regardless of the evils Hitler intended to visit on the country, Wells declared the Republic's founding democratic values would endure. Quote, no enabling act gives you the power to destroy ideas that are eternal and indestructible, he said. Hitler rose. Quote, the nice theories that you, Herr Delegate, just proclaimed are words that have come a bit too late for world history, he began. He dismissed allegations that he posed any kind of threat to the German people. He reminded Wells that the Social Democrats had had 13 years to address the issues that really mattered to the German people: employment, stability, dignity. Quote, where was this battle during the time you had the power in your hand? Hitler asked. The National Socialist delegates, along with observers in the galleries, cheered. The rest of the delegates remained still. A series of them rose to state both their concerns and positions on the proposed enabling law. The centrists, as well as the representatives of the Bavarians People Party, said they were willing to vote yes. This is yes on the Enabling Act, despite reservations, quote, that in normal times could scarcely have been overcome. Similarly, Reinhold Maier, the leader of the German State Party, expressed concerns about what would happen to judicial independence, due process, freedom of the press, and equal rights for all citizens under the law, and stated that he had, quote, serious reservations about according Hitler dictatorial powers. But then he announced that his party, too, was voting in favor of the law, eliciting laughter from the floor. Shortly before 8 o'clock that evening, the voting was completed. The 94 Social Democrat delegates who were in attendance cast their votes against the law. Among the Social Democrats was the former Interior Minister of Prussia, Karl Severing, who had been arrested earlier in the day as he was about to enter the Reichstag, but was released temporarily in order to cast his vote. The remaining Reichstag delegates, 441 in all, voted in favor of the new law, delivering Hitler a 4/5 majority, more than enough to put the enabling law into effect without amendment or restriction. The next morning, U.S. Ambassador Frederick Sackett sent a telegram to the State Department. On the basis of this law, the Hitler cabinet can reconstruct the entire system of government as it eliminates practically all constitutional restraints. Just a solemn warning to how quickly a constitution and the rule of law can be dismantled, how people who otherwise would be in opposition capitulate, make excuses for it, act like it can't really be that bad, it won't really get that bad, and we all know how bad it really got. So I want to leave you today. I'm going to share comments from our movement, from our viewers before I do, but with a real sense that the Democrats in particular have to be held to account, that the media, so-called media, you want to just take a moment to express both gratitude for the media that did cover 14th Now. And if you go to the press page at nowmarch.org, you can see the media coverage and the live streams from all 3 days. So thank you to them. But where was the rest of the media? Where was the pro-democracy media? Where was Midas Touch with their 3 million followers who they are telling that truth is golden and they're going to give them all the tools to fight back, when they ignored the one vital tool that we all had as a country and are covering from for their friends in the Democratic establishment? This has to be a moment of accountability. It has to be a dividing line. One of the comments that in response to the activities of last week just said, just wondering why MAGA lies make the news, but we couldn't get press coverage for trying to get the election verified or get Congress to use the Constitution to stop an insurrectionist from taking office. The media has a role in this. Right now, I was in a studio, an MSNBC studio, with a friend of mine, Sergeant Aquilino Gonell, on the night of January 5th. And I was just standing in that building thinking, do these people realize that it's the Constitution? It's the Constitution that gives this whole building the ability to exist, the people in here, the ability to work and report. Could they not have some more honor for that Constitution that gives them that freedom while they still have it? Here's some more comments from our amazing supporters out there. I want everybody who's part of this movement to know how indelible your place in history is, how important your stand was, how we have zero regrets for what we did. And we laid down the marker, and there are people around the world grateful for the stand we took. Here's one. Thanks for everything you've done. I've no doubt we are all positioned better within the context of awareness moving forward. You've given it a prominent reference point on our timeline, one to which we can point back to for even further strengthening our positions in future challenges. Thank you, Jessica. What you managed to put forward in an extremely short period of time will always be remembered. By the way, an extraordinary team that worked with me. So thank you to all of them. I see hashtag 14th Now as the beginning of a nationwide movement that will and must grow as we continue to do the work to peacefully save our democracy. So proud of you and everyone who did all they could in person and online. We are building an army of positivity and strength that will be ready to rebuild anything that Trump destroys. Don't lose hope or faith in America. There will be change, but we will get through it one step at a time together. Congressional Democrats did not honor their oath to defend the Constitution, and we're getting to the shade again here. Constitutional Democrats did not honor their oath to defend the Constitution. They entirely capitulated to its enemies by wrapping themselves in a twisted form of altruism. Thank you for standing up. I agree with what you're saying here. Dems completed the coup started by the right 4 years ago, all to keep a dangerous, corrupt man in office or return him to office. A failure of gigantic proportions. So that's the proper framing for where we are. I spoke in the first week after the election, back when I was still on Midas Touch, and I knew they were censoring me, but managed to save my show that week, that we really had to turn back to God, and that I wouldn't be here, and nothing that you see that I've done through my activism, through my victorious legal battles, none of that would be possible without my spiritual foundation and turning to God. And even, seeing the destruction of this week and just the sadness and tragedy, I most certainly am going to turn back to my spiritual source and to my maker and look for guidance. And I know that with God, all things are with possible, not with man, not with our flawed mortal thinking, but with God, with divine guidance, all things are possible. So that's the standpoint that I will be working from. It's who I am. If you don't like religion, I am not here without spirituality and with God. Organized religion has caused a lot of problems in our world, but the true meaning of religion is to rebind, to put together broken bonds. And so I won't let that be adulterated, and I will continue to turn back to my source, because I frankly don't know how to live without it. So I want to thank you all again so much. Please, if you're not already, subscribe to the Jessica Denson YouTube channel. You're going to get coverage here that you're not getting anywhere else. I'm not afraid. I only know how to work and live one way, and that's to follow the truth and to confront the things that come to me as needing to be confronted. I don't know how to just work for some profit model. It's not why I'm here. It's not who I ever will be or can be. So you can support that by subscribing for free to the Jessica Denson YouTube channel. You can also support my work at thejessicadenson.com/donate. If you go to thejessicadenson.com, we have merch for Lights On. I'm going to give a shout out to Nathan Dyer. I know he is working tirelessly to try to assemble a legal effort to challenge, to bring a voter disenfranchisement lawsuits in swing states where he sees anomalies. If you want to support his work, I think you can go to electiontruthalliance.org. I'm going to check that while I'm talking to you, make sure I have the website right. Yeah, electiontruthalliance.org. I know they're looking for financial support. They're also looking for the legal, right now, trying to lock down the election security lawyers that they would need to bring such an action. So if you want to do that, you can support him there. Thank you so much, everybody, for being in this fight. Thank you for taking a stand in history when it mattered most. We will absolutely not be forgotten. I have no regrets. I'm so grateful to have stood with you. Thank you so much. And as always, let your light shine.